Sahanam bhavatu sahanau bhunaktu saha viryam karavavakai tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Akhandamandalakaram vyaptam yena characharam tatpadam darshitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ajnanatimmirandasya jnananjanasalakaya chakshurummilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Gurudeva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sthavaram Jangamam Vyaptam Yatkinchit Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapya Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Vartaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Mudinam Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Ambadvamanusankritami Bhagavad Gita Bhagavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Surmanti Divyai Savai Vedai Sambhapada Brahmopanishadai Gayanti Yam Samaga Dhyanavastita Tadgadena Manasaha Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yashyantam Navidusura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. So let's jump the last three verses.
4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
We'll do it together. Buddhirjnanasambodhah Shama Satyam Dhamma Samaha Sukham Dukkham Bhaho Bhavah Vayam Cha Vayameva Cha Ahimsa Samata Drishti Tabodhanam Yasho Yashaha Bhavanti Bhava Bhutanam Matra eva vidadvidaha Yesham loka ima prajaha.
So in verse number 6, Lord Krishna is describing the 7 rishis, the ancient 4, also the Manus, and says the powers, possessed of powers like me, were born of my own mind. From them are these creatures in the world originated and sustained. So this chapter is the chapter of the divine glories, and from the chapter on meditation, we follow this whole idea about divinity and how it expresses itself, not only at the cosmic level, because here again the emphasis is that at the cosmic level and at the individual level, we are talking about the same reality. The underlying reality which is there is one and the same. And Vibhuti Yoga follows on from description in chapter number 7 of the knowledge and the wisdom. In chapter number 8, Lord Krishna talks about the imperishable Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, and then discusses the chapter number, what's the next one? Number 9. He talks about the royal secret, and then here he talks about Vibhuti. So, in other words, he's talking about different aspects of the same divinity expresses itself in different ways, and says that the important thing really is to get connected with that divinity, whether we think in terms of cosmic extension of that reality, or if we think in terms of the individual reality of you and me. Because the point which Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna is that when we think about our own individual experience, we see that we are in this world of names and forms as an individual and going through various different kind of experiences. Okay. And when we talk about all these experiences, and Arjuna himself is caught up in one very severe experience right in the middle of the battlefield, which is an extreme sense of grief. And that grief is nothing but a representation of all our experiences in this world. So if you want to escape from that grief and know what to do in the world, which is really the basic question of Bhagavad Gita, is that what do I do in the world? Just like Arjuna is asking this question, tell me what to do because I don't know what to do. Caught up in this dilemma of having to act in the world in the middle of the battlefield and seeing my kids and kin in front of me, I don't know what to do because I'm overcome by guilt and shame and grief, which is making me not to function in the world. So this solution which Lord Krishna is giving to Arjuna is to recognize that this is not the reality. You are looking at this reality of yourself as this individual. That is not the ultimate reality. You have to go beyond this phenomenal reality which you are experiencing now to that which is the ultimate reality. And therefore, he gives him the whole process through which he has to go through in order to recognize and absorb and stay in that ultimate reality. Okay. And he gives him all different kinds of ways of thinking about it. And in this chapter, he begins by saying, actually, because you are so interested in hearing this, for your welfare, I'm going to repeat this knowledge again. So he's not talking about anything new, which he has not discussed before, but he's talking about the same thing, but in a different way. So just like, when we look at an object, we turn it around, turn it upside down, turn it this way, turn it that way, and we see all facets of that particular object in many different ways by turning it around in all different directions. So also Lord Krishna is conceptually turning this idea of the divine in the mind of Arjuna so that he can see all aspects of the divine in various different ways. And here he started talking about about the divinity in the sense of saying that the rishis and the devas, the hosts of heaven and the rishis, even they do not know my true origin. So here the interpretation which is given is that we can look at this Sapta Rishis and the Devas as nothing but the cosmic creation, which according to Sankhya philosophy consists of these 7 different elements, which are the 7 Rishis. So which are the 7 elements?
5 senses.
5 sense objects. I mean the 5 the tanmatras, which are the sense objects. And
Mind,
the total mind is the Mahatattva, and then we have got the Ahankara. So the Mahat, Ahankara, and the Tanmatras altogether constitute the 7 principles of creation, the 7 aspects of this cosmos, which is represented by these 7 rishis, and the devas represent the sense organs. So at the individual level, then the devas also are included to, to emphasize the point that at the individual level, the devas, which constitute the sense organ, also is part and parcel of this creation. So whether we look at the total cosmic creation consisting of the Mahat and the Ahankara and the Tanmatras, or we look at the individual who is also within this creation, okay, and this individual within that larger creation also consists of these various elements, which he then describes in the next one as the um, in number 4 and 5 and also number 6, consisting of the various elements of the individual. So what are we talking about here? We are talking about, on the one hand, at the cosmic level, we are talking about the entity called what?
Ishvara.
Ishvara. Okay. At the individual level, we are talking about what? We are talking about the Jiva. So Ishvara is at the cosmic level. Jiva is at the individual level. Both of them are covered with this upadhis. The only difference between the individual and the total, which is Ishvara, so the only difference between Jiva and Ishvara is the nature of the upadhis. In the individual, the upadhi is body, mind, intellect. In the cosmic level, Ishvara's upadhis are Mahat, Ahankara, and the Tanmatras. Okay, and when we look beyond these upadhis, what we find that in the Jiva, we are talking about what? The Atman. And when we are talking about the upadhis of the Ishvara and going beyond the upadhis of the Ishvara, then what are we talking about? We are talking about Brahman. So Brahman, Atman, Ishvara, Jiva. Upadhis in one way and upadhis of the body, mind, intellect in the individual. Okay, does that make sense? So we've got 2 levels of thinking about divinity. And Lord Krishna here is emphasizing that we can think of these things in both these ways, and each and every aspect of this is then manifested in this created world as either the objects of the world, the individuals of the world, the things of the world, and these are nothing but the manifestations of the divine. So that even in 4 and 5, he says that all this the inner manifestations of the divinities, he says these qualities of the being at the level of the individual, consisting of the intellect, the wisdom, the non-illusion, forgiveness, truth, self-restraint, calmness, happiness, pain, birth, death, etc. These are all qualities of being which arise from me alone. So what does it mean? That we can relate to each and every aspect of our individual experience, which consists of this list of things. Who can say that you don't experience any one of these things, right? You got an intellect, you got wisdom, you got forgiveness, truth, all these things are there. And therefore, this constitutes the expression, the manifestation, like he says, these are qualities of the being which arise from me. So, what is the point of that? What is the point of pointing out these things to us? Is that we can directly now relate the divine to something which is happening to us in our own experience moment to moment. So that when we think about self-restraint and calmness, for example, when we talk about the Dhamma or Shama, or sukham or dukkham. When you are experiencing any of these individual entities of experience, what we are saying, these are arising from the self alone. Okay? So there is a direct connection between your phenomenal world of experiences, okay? Sarvaloka. Remember, he used the word Sarvaloka, and he says Sarvaloka Maheshwar. In other words, that you are the Lord of all these experiences which are taking place, and Sarvaloka means that all this is nothing but the totality of your experiences. That is the totality of your experiences, and the Lord of that totality of experiences is who? Is nothing but the self. So in the individual, it is the self governing all the entities of the body, mind, intellect. At the level of the cosmos, it is the Ishvara who is governing the whole cosmos with the Mahat and the Ahankara and the Tanmatras, and all this is contained within the experience of the individual. So when he says that all these seven rishis, ancient four, and possessed of powers like me were born of the mind, what he's saying is that everything is originating from that Brahman. Brahman is really where everything is kind of originating from, and in the individual, when he talks about the ancient four, he's talking about the inner organs of the Man, Buddhi, Chit, Ahankara. So simply put, it means that recognize the divinity within yourself, recognize the divinity in the cosmos, and knowing this, he says, then in number 7, he says that this is what now is going to happen. Once we recognize the microcosm and the macrocosm and the underlying divinity, the substratum of existence of the individual and the total created universe and the individual, when we recognize the truth, and he says that we get when we are able to connect with it in this truth in this way, he says that we become established in something called tremorless yoga, and he says there is absolutely no doubt about it. So let's chant this verse number 7, and then we'll see what it says.
Etam vibhutim yogam cha
Etam vibhutim yogam cha
mama yo veti tattvataha
mama yo vedi tattvataha
so vikampena yogena
so vikampena yogena
yujyate natra samshayah.
yujyate natra samshayah. Etam vibhutim yogam cha mama yo vedi tattvataha so vikampena yogena yujyate natra samshayah.
So he who in truth knows these manifold manifestations of my being, the macrocosm, and this yoga power of my microcosm becomes established in the tremorless yoga. There is no doubt about it. So here he is saying that he who in truth knows. So there are two things here which he's talking about. On the one hand, he's talking about my vibhuti and my yoga. And vibhuti is here described by Gurudev as manifold manifestation of beings, vibhuti. And my power, which is the yoga power, as it were. So again, emphasizing the point that there are two levels of understanding this divinity. On the one hand, it is the macrocosmic level, which is the projection of a created universe through the intervention of the seven rishis. In other words, the Mahat, the Ahankara, and the Tanmatras, which give rise to this macrocosm. And this is the absolute vibhuti which is there. While at the individual level, the microcosmic level, This is the limited world through the intervention of the mind-born, which are the four ancient Kumaras. Again, these are the Man, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankar. So even at the individual level, this divine yoga of the self in each one of us is manifesting as this individual functioning in the world with all these four elements of the inner instrument, and also the body, which is the gross body, and the causal body. So while he is just emphasizing the inner instrument, the subtle body, it also includes the other one as part and parcel of this individuality. So he says, if we recognize the self in ourselves as this ultimate reality of Atma, on the other hand, if we recognize the consciousness, which is infinite consciousness, here and now in this whole macrocosmic level, then he says, if we know both these things and we realize these two things, we become established in this tremorless yoga. So we'll see what this tremorless yoga is. But just to kind of, emphasize the point that these two things need to be understood and recognized. On the one hand, the microcosmic, and on the other hand, the macrocosmic. So really speaking, what does it mean? It means that, in my day-to-day transactional life, then my attention is where? Where is the attention in our day-to-day transactional life? In the world of names and forms. When I'm in my transactional life in this way, I've got to recognize the divine every moment, every time, through the things and beings of the world. And he gives us a whole list of things, not only in this chapter, earlier chapters. Remember, he has mentioned the vibhutis in various different ways, that we can connect with the divine through anything in the world, as long as we recognize that he is the chief factor in everything, all the names and forms. Not only is the chief factor in all names and forms in our transactional reality, but he is the supreme factor which goes beyond all these names and forms. Okay? So, in other words, in our transactional life, I got to make that connection with the divine through recognizing that divinity in all the names and forms. And at the level of my own sadhana, which is if I sit in meditation, then I've got to also know the self in me. So what is the basic proposition? Knowing the self in me as knowing the self in the whole cosmos. And once I begin to do that at the level of the individual, in myself as the self, and the self in the world as the same self, then I have now connected with divinity at the microcosmic level and also at the macrocosmic level, and recognize that these two things are one and the same thing. In other words, the underlying substratum of everything is nothing but the ultimate reality, which is Brahman. So he says we must know this in reality. In reality, this is to be known. The truth of this is to be known, which means that what Gurudev is saying here, this means that the above mentioned knowledge is to be realized in a subjective experience and intuitively lived. Okay. So it is a subjective experience which is realized, and it is intuitively lived. In other words, it's a living truth which is there in front of me and in me and around me. It does not belong to Sunday morning class. This is not a Sunday morning class truth which remains here and doesn't go out of here. It means that even when I go, I'm here or not here, that truth is with me, and that truth is the living truth, which is the subjective experience. At the same time, it is intuitively lived. I am the self, and when I play through the seven spheres, I paint the universe, and when I play through the four ancients, I live the tearful life. An appropriate statement in the last stanza. This is what he's saying, is that at the individual level, at the cosmic level, I recognize that ultimate reality is nothing but the self. So, if these two things are then realized, that the manifold manifestations of my being, all the names and the forms of the world, and this at the microcosmic level as this individual jiva who experiences the self within through the sadhana or meditation practice. When one realizes these two things, it says we become established in this thing called tremorless yoga. So what is this tremorless yoga? So, if we think about this, that we are in what kind of yoga at the moment? We experience tremors in our life all the time, okay? Tremors in the mind all the time. Sometimes that tremor becomes like an earthquake. That earthquake which is now being experienced by Arjuna. Arjuna experiences earthquake in his mind, which shattered him completely, broke him down. So think about all the tremors which are experiencing even the last 2 hours. Lots of tremors. Tremors are going on all the time. In other words, that the mind is in this state of vikshepa, and the mind is full of impurities, mala, and the mind has got a curtain before it which does not allow it to see all the reality which is here and now. Okay. Mala, vikshepa, avrana. These are the three things which stop us from realizing the truth here and now. And these are the vikshepa particularly is what is mentioned here, are the tremors, the agitations which are going on in the mind all the time. In other words, the mind is in a state of agitation all the time. It is going from here, there, everywhere. And it is going in this particular way all over the place. The monkey mind is jumping about because what is driving this monkey mind are all the what you call the vasanas and the desires and the attachments. So our desires and our vasanas are driving this monkey mind to say, I want this, I want to see this, I want to hear this, I want to experience this, I want to experience that. So the monkey mind, which is driven by the pressure of the vasanas, pushes it in so many different directions, and we experience these tremors in the mind all the time, the agitation in the mind, so that the mind is not able to remain attentive to one thing. So according to yoga now, it means that we require these two things. Number one, we require to have the single pointedness of the mind, ekagrata. So the monkey mind has to be trained and trained and trained until it begins to become single pointed. And what is the starting point of the journey according to Bhagavad Gita? Training the mind is karma yoga. We start by karma yoga, by training the mind so that it becomes single pointed. It is not disturbed by anything which is going to be related to the vasanas or the attitudes or the attachment. Is simply functioning with Ishwar Arpan Buddhi and Prasad Buddhi, making it to be absolutely single pointed. And taking the element of bhakti in that as well, and then sitting down in meditation, we make that mind, which is single pointed, to become less and less and less and less agitated until it becomes completely still. From the single pointedness of the mind to the stillness of the mind. When the mind is still, there is no tremor. there's no tremor in the mind. Okay? And this is what he's talking about. He's talking about becoming established in the tremorless yoga, which means the complete stillness of the mind, and that stillness of the mind becomes a complete absorption in the ultimate reality, so that we are now absorbed in the self. In that absorption of the self, there is complete stillness of the mind. So, wherein permanent and steadily established of the experience of the self becomes not only available, but we become established in this reality of the self. So this is another term which Gurudev is saying, what Krishna uses in reference to yoga. So he says that equanimity is yoga. He says that dexterity in action is yoga. Then he says that the separation from dukkha and association with sukha is also yoga. And here he has given us the fourth term, which identifies what yoga is, okay, which is called the stillness yoga. Stillness means tremorless. It is the complete stillness of the mind, which comes about. Why? Why does it come about? Because we have known the truth at the macrocosmic level and at the microcosmic level. So, in other words, that when we recognize the truth at these two levels, the mind starts becoming absolutely still, tremorless yoga, and in that we become established in the true self. So, not only is it giving us a way to live in the world, but also, in a sense, to become totally absorbed in the self as the substratum of everything, including the individual, including the whole cosmic creation. So, it may look as if this is a really high philosophy, which sometimes may be difficult to understand. I don't understand this macrocosm, but really is bringing us down right to the ground level, whereby he's saying, recognize each and every experience within yourself, the sensations in the body, the feelings in the mind, the thoughts in the intellect, and all these are nothing but the what you call the manifestations which are born out of that divinity. And once we recognize the truth underlying this body, mind, intellect, underlying the whole cosmos, the mind starts becoming still, and we get absorbed in the ultimate reality called Brahma. So it is a living truth. It's not an intellectual truth. It's not just jnana. It's not intellectual. It is something which is experienced here and now. And that is an important thing to learn. Is that make it a living truth. How are you going to make it a living truth? By connecting with the divine through the senses and through the mind and through the intellect on a moment-to-moment basis, and it becomes a living truth for you, and therefore leading you towards the absorption in the self. Okay, so then he says, what exactly is the technique by which we can get ourselves established steadily, permanently in the unbroken experience of infinite as of our own real nature? So here again, the typical Lord Krishna technique of describing a principle and then pinning it down to a practical way of approaching that philosophy or the concept. So principle is mentioned, then the practice is mentioned. So here he has mentioned as the principle being that the underlying reality in the cosmos and the underlying reality in the individual is one and the same. Experience that reality as a truth, as a living truth, and then you will be able to get absorbed in that truth through the stillness of the mind. How do you go about doing that? Then he's mentioning us into the next verse. So let's jump to the next verse.
Aham sarvasya prabhavah
Aham sarvasya prabhavah.
मत्तः सर्वं प्रवर्तते
Matta sarvam pravartate.
इति मत्वा भजन्ते माम्
Iti matva bhajante mam.
बुधा भावसमन्विताः
Buddha bhava samanditaha. Aham sarvasya prabhavah. Matta sarvam pravartate. Iti matva bhajante mam. Buddha bhava samanditaha.
So it says, I am the source of all. For me, everything evolves. Thus, understanding thus, the wise endowed with the loving consciousness worships me. So this is the technique that is describing. It says that understanding, we have to first of all understand that I am the source of all. For me, everything evolves. So when he is looking at I am the source of all, he is not saying Krishna is the source of all. What is he saying? Also, in a sense, Ishvara and the Jiva, what is he saying? Actually, this applies to each one of us individually. In other words, that the self in me, I as the self am the source of everything. So I as the source, if you translate this particular verse, not as Lord Krishna talking about himself, but you and me talking about ourselves. I as the self am the source of all, and I as me as this self, from there everything evolves, and understanding thus, the wise endowed me with this loving consciousness worship me. So, even if you look at it from the cosmic point of view as Ishvara as an avatar in Lord Krishna, and then we understand it at the individual level. And as I was saying, the difference between the Jiva and the Ishvara is nothing but the nature of the upadhis which cover these two things. And once we go beyond these upadhis, then we can say that we have come to the ultimate substratum of existence, and this is the same essence in everything. Same essence in the whole of the cosmos, and the same essence in all the beings of the world. And here he says this, in electricity considered as pure energy, there is neither light nor heat. So in the same way, the pure self, in its essential nature, is neither God nor the ego. So this is an interesting way of putting it now. So that, in electricity, pure energy is pure energy. And electricity by itself, we don't know whether it exists or not. Okay? How do we know electricity exists? Only through it being manifested through the various different appliances which are there. And there could be 1,000 different appliances which are there, and underlying all these 1,000 appliances which are functioning, there is only one reality, which is the electricity which is manifesting through all these appliances. That underlying reality is only one, which is the electricity. So he says the person who realizes that this electricity is the underlying reality in all the appliances, in other words, when we recognize that underlying reality in all of us and even beyond us into the whole cosmos, then we get established in this supreme awareness through tremulous yoga. Now, another meaning of tremulous yoga, again referring back to the Yoga Sutra. So what it says in the Yoga Sutra is that when we are in that state of samadhi, so this is what Gurudev is talking about here, more familiarly known in the scriptures as samadhi yoga. So this tremulous yoga is also samadhi yoga. Now, what happens is when the mind becomes so normally the mind is governed by the gunas, and each one of our minds has got a certain texture of those gunas. The mind can be dominated by tamas or rajas or sattva or a mixture of all these various different things. Okay. So Sunday morning is normally what? Tamas. So we close our eyes and we say, yeah, we are listening to this, but sometimes the mind is elsewhere. But I know in this class it is all sattva. So the mind is governed by the gunas. The gunas play about in the mind. And what sadhana does, what spiritual practice does, is to purify the mind. Purification of the mind is called chitta shuddhi. Chitta shuddhi comes about as a result of our practice of karma yoga, karma sannyasa yoga, karma jnana sannyasa yoga, and dhyana yoga. All these are different graded techniques of bringing the mind to a sattvic state. So much so that the mind becomes 99% sattva and 1% rajas, with a very minute trace maybe of tamas. So this mind is now absolutely alert. It is absolutely aware. It has got no movement. It is tremorless. Why? Because there is no rajas. Rajas is a very tiny amount. The rajas which is required at that point of purification is only to direct the mind and lift it out of itself. Okay? When that trace of rajas actually disappears, then that tremorless yoga begins to um, merge with the individual awareness, then merges with the total awareness, which is pure consciousness, because now even the rajas has been removed. And in that case, what happens? Tremorless yoga leads us to realization of the truth. This is samadhi. In samadhi, the mind is in a completely in a state of pure sattva, with just a trace of rajas, which is just lifting it, keeping it uplifted at that point. Even when that rajas, which is that mindful amount, is dropped, the mind is lifted itself, lifted out of itself into the ultimate reality. This is samadhi. So in the Yoga Sutra, of course, it gives the 5 different types of samadhi, again graded so that you go from one to the next to the next, until you come to this asamprajnata samadhi, which is nothing but this kind of meditation, which is the highest state of absorption and meditation, which then lifts us out of the intellect itself into the supreme awareness. So it is all kind of, logically set out by Lord Krishna step by step, so there is no misunderstanding of where we are and what we need to do. And in this case, he says that understanding that I am the source of all, and from me everything evolves, understanding thus the wise endowed with loving consciousness. Now, what is this loving consciousness, which he then goes on to describe? Is this what Shankaracharya calls as the full perseverance in seeking the supreme reality. And here he is talking about abhinivesha, full of perseverance, this will to achieve, this will to live, this will to know the truth, this intense desire to know the truth, this perseverance. Abhinivesha is what he's talking about when he's talking about this loving consciousness. He worshipped me with his loving consciousness, means with the full determination, that element of the desire which is so intense, that is driving us to the seeking the supreme reality, that he says is this loving consciousness. And what to do with that loving consciousness is bhajan. Bhajan means worshipping. He says bhajan is the invocation of the divine aspect of our character, which is already in us but lying unmanifested behind the veil of misconception that arise from our own spiritual ignorance. So, in other words, that what is bhajan? Bhajan, if you think about bhajan, even if you think about it in an ordinary sense, when you are singing the bhajan, what are you doing?
The glories of the Lord.
That's right. So you're invoking the glories of the Lord. In other words, you're remembering the glories of the Lord. You're connecting with the Lord as this divine name and form through this song which is uttered through the speech. In other words, that becomes my connection with the divine. In this case, what he's saying, that the bhajan is really the connection between the individual awareness and the total awareness. The connection between the individual awareness and the total awareness is described as this bhajan, and here Gurudev is saying this is a kind of invocation, that I'm invoking that supreme reality within myself through this loving consciousness. So when the bhajan is so intense, it is so intense that we get absorbed in the thought and the word and the music of the bhajan, so much so that we get uplifted into the experience of the divine. So and you know, this is the kind of sadhana behind singing the bhajan. Bhajan singing is not about demonstrating your technical ability to sing the bhajan. Okay? It's about actually invoking the divinity through this music and the word to lift ourselves, beyond the ego, into the reality and the manifestation of that name and form which we are invoking through this body. So it is a very powerful way. Bhajan is a very powerful way. Just like mantra, japa is a very powerful way of connecting with that divinity through the words. And in the case of bhajan or kirtan, it is through the words and the music. Both have a profound effect on the mind, so that this loving consciousness lifts itself beyond itself to connect with that divinity in a very intense, strong way. So this loving consciousness, which is this perseverance in seeking that supreme reality, and this bhajan, which is the invocation of that supreme reality, both these things combined together. In other words, the determination to know the truth and the connection with the truth, invocation of the truth, these two things combined together, and the understanding that I am the source of all and me, everything evolves, that this will bring us to the state of complete realization. Realization takes place when these two things are being what you call practiced, invocation of the truth and the perseverance to meet the truth, and the understanding of that substratum, of that underlying reality. These three things begin to take us to that complete identification, because what he's saying also here is the love of devotion is measured by the capacity of the lover to identify himself with the beloved. So your devotion is measured by what? By the capacity and the intensity with which you are becoming identified with the object of your devotion. So this identification is the underlying idea also in this path of knowledge. In the path of devotion, it is about the name and form for your Ishtadevata and how you can connect with that Ishtadevata through bhajan and through the words and the music. Whereas here, it means that the awareness in the individual self gets absorbed in the total awareness, and this is nothing but the identification of the individual Atman with the Brahman. This is also can be said as devotion or bhajan. So not only has given us the idea about the underlying reality, cosmic level, individual level, but how to get absorbed, what to do with it, and he says we need this tremendous perseverance, mumukshatva, in other words, to know the truth and to lift ourselves beyond ourselves into that reality by means of invocation of that truth within ourselves. And when that happens, we get established in the truth through the tremendous truth. So there you go. So, and then he goes on to further elaborate on this point of what practice is required, and we'll go on to the next one, which is number 9, and we'll just briefly describe it, and then next time we'll take it up in more detail.
Machitta Madgata Pranaha
Machitta Madgata Pranaha
Bodhayanta Parasparam
Bodhayanta Parasparam
Katayantascha Mam Nityam
Katayantascha Mam Nityam
Tushyanti Charamanti Cha
Tushyanti Charamanti Cha
Machitta
Madgata Pranaha Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Charamanti Cha.
So again, he is giving us some pointers as to what needs to be done. And here he says, number 1, the mind wholly resting in me. Number 2, with the senses absorbed in me. Number 3, enlightening each other and ever speaking of me. They are satisfied and delighted. So there is no compromise here. He says, completely resting on me. In other words, the mind becomes a single point, one-track mind. Okay? One-track mind means that divinity, and nothing else but the divine. Wholly resting in me. So it's not that I go to this thing and that at a certain point I come and say I've had enough of these things, then come to rest in the Lord. Sometimes that happens as well, isn't it? That we get fed up of life and say, oh, this is not happening, that is not happening. Let me get connected with the Lord because He's the one who is going to give me what I want. Yeah. That's not the way. He says, wholly resting in me, which means that the mind has got nothing else to think about, nothing else to rest on, nothing else to think about or to feel about, but just the divinity itself. And he says, the mind resting totally in me. Not only the mind, but he says the senses absorbed in me. So what does it mean? It means that on the one hand, I can think of the name and the form and say, okay, here's the Saraswati Devi. I'm looking at that, and my mind is completely absorbed in that name and form through my eyes. But in a wider sense, what it means that each and every phenomenal experience which I'm experiencing through my senses, moment by moment, reminds me of divinity and nothing else. So not only is my mind absorbed in the thought and the feeling of the reality, but all the senses, what I'm looking at, hearing, touching, feeling, thinking, everything turns towards the divine. It is a complete orientation of the divine of the individual. It requires that amount of intensity. That's why it says full of perseverance, abhinivesha. This is what it means in the previous verse when he was talking about this loving consciousness. This loving consciousness requires us to completely turn the mind so that the mind rests only on the divine, in the divine, and even the senses are completely turned towards the divine so that we hear nothing but the divine, we see nothing but the divine, and we exist with all the senses only experiencing the divine, nothing else. And the mind also completely absorbed in the divine. Enlightening each other and ever speaking of me. So the mind is absorbed in the divine, the senses are absorbed in the divine, the speech is involved in the divine. Okay? So thought, word and deed. Even the deed, whatever transactions we are doing, is only in relationship to the divine. Which means our total reality is now nothing but the divine. The total reality of the mind, whatever is going on in the mind, through the senses, through our transaction, through the speech, everything is divinity, 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 nothing else. It's quite a whole order, isn't it? Imagine that just from this moment that you're going to be completely absorbed in this divine. Is it going to happen? It's going to be hard, but it can happen if we have got this tremendous perseverance in seeking the reality. That is the factor which is a very important factor. So enlightening each other and ever speaking of me, they are satisfied and delighted. Okay. Tushyanti Ramanti. And here Gurudev will talk about Ramanti and Kridanti. What is the difference between Krida and Ramana? So that we'll take up next time. But here essentially what he's saying is that with this enlightened understanding of this substratum of existence, Brahman, underlying reality which is there, and having this intense desire to connect with it and connecting it with through bhajan or the identification with that, then with the mind resting completely in that divinity and senses also absorbed and even speaking about that reality all the time, then they are satisfied and delighted. So tushyanti means what? It means that there is nothing else you want in life. Once that has happened, actually all the desires get completely absorbed in just this one desire of the divine. Even the desires become single pointed. There's only one thing to do, and that is realization of the self. Okay? So not only the life becomes concentrated in one track, mind becomes concentrated in one track, senses, the speech, everything is just one thing, and only one thing. In that case, there is nothing else to be done. The mind becomes completely satisfied and it becomes delighted. At the moment, our satisfaction and delight is coming from where? It's coming from the objects of the world and the people of the world and the situations of the world. We run here, there, and everywhere to this person, this situation, that object, and we get say, I'm going to be satisfied by having this, that, and the other. And we get some kind of delight out of that, and it disappears. But here he's saying, because the mind is completely absorbed, senses are absorbed, everything is absorbed, the complete satisfaction is also there, and the complete delight is also there. What a wonderful existence. If we can only get to that point. Good. Okay, so we'll continue more detail next time. And you can conclude with the prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om